So I think I might be live, but I can't actually tell because I've never done this before. So I'm going to wait for something to happen. If anyone can hear me or see me, if you can let me know, that'd be cool. So I'm just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to turn up. Okay, people are turning up, so that's cool. I think the other live just finished, so I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to get a drink or go to the loo or whatever you need to do. I don't know how long people have been sat here watching these videos, but whilst I'm waiting for more people to arrive, I will introduce you to me. So, hi Clarissa, thank you, I appreciate that. So I'm Sally. I work for a lovely company called Exemplar Dogs. We are based in South Devon in the UK in England. I'm not sure if I've got American people watching this, if you've just woken up or wherever your time zones are, let me know. I'd love to know where people are watching from. So I am a force-free trainer and behaviourist and emotional coach, and I really like to use the term emotional coach basically to look at behaviour modification from a slightly different slant, because I think when people think about behaviour modification, they think about very traditional things, and I think if we can look at the wording emotional coach, it kind of it teaches people to look at understanding their dog a little differently and working with their dog a little differently. So I always like to throw that in. And the purpose of this talk today is to share with you some of my thoughts and experiences on living with a hand-reared dog. So I'm going to do something a little bit tricky for any professional to do, which is to talk about their own dog, because it's quite easy for us to look at other dogs objectively, but not always that easy to do it with our own. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about him, tell you his story, because his story is the reason that I'm in this profession today. So those of you that have worked in rescue have probably worked with hand rears or come across hand rears. You might have even hand reared dogs yourselves. I'd love to know if any of you have. What I'm not going to be doing is, I love that you're watching from bed, Debbie. That's cool. I wish I was, but I'm sat in my kitchen, and I'm hoping that the barking dog chorus, which is what I call my cul-de-sac, doesn't start, because everyone around here has a dog, and they all usually start at about 10 o'clock at night. So if that happens, I apologise to everyone. But yeah, what I'm not going to be doing is telling you how to hand rear a dog, how to go off and rear a dog or a pup or a litter. I'm not qualified to do that. I don't know how to do that. I'm not going to tell you how to hand rear a dog. But what I do want to explore are some ways that the way that we rear a dog can possibly feed into adult behaviour. Now, the tricky thing with that is that it's really hard to quantify what parts of the rearing attribute to adult behaviour and what experiences the dog has had growing up contributes to the behaviour, because where do you draw that line? It's hard, but we can take into consideration the way that the dog is reared and how that could impact their emotions and health and various things which we know is a factor that can feed into behaviour as a pup, as an adolescent, and into adult life as well. So let me tell you my dog's story now that we have a good handful of people watching. So my dog is a wonderful, wonderful Staffordshire Bull Terrier. I would show you him, but he's currently upstairs asleep on my bed, and I'm quite happy with him being there at the moment, so I'm not going to call him down. But he's a wonderful, wonderful boy, and he was abandoned on bin day in the UK. So for any people watching from the States, that is when they come around and collect our rubbish. I don't know if you call it bin day in the States, don't know. But yeah, he was abandoned on bin day with his litter, and it is believed that they were about 24 hours old. We're not sure, but they were blind, deaf, little wriggling things in a little box. And someone found them, fortunately, before the bin lorries came, took them to a vet who got them off to a rescue centre nearby, a really lovely independent rescue centre. And obviously it was all hands on deck with the staff, and they reared him with his litter. There were 7 pups and 6 made it. They did an absolutely phenomenal job of rearing him. they smashed out the park. When I was consolidating some of my thoughts for this talk, I messaged a few of them and I said, thank you, because I've never thanked you. Well, I did, but I haven't thanked you for a while. And now that I know a lot more about dog behaviour than I did back then, I really appreciate actually how much room for error there is when hand rearing a dog, but he's so well-rounded. He's turned into a really, really well-rounded dog. And I'd like to think that some of that's to do with me, but obviously some of it as well is also to do with his rearing. So in terms of him, we don't know his parental history. Obviously he was left out with the rubbish, so we don't know anything about mum, dad. We don't know if mum is okay. We don't know her health history, none of that stuff. Obviously, he had his litter mates with him, which is hugely to his advantage in terms of his emotional well-being, because he wasn't socially deprived. He had his litter, and yeah, he's generally pretty resilient. He's got a few little anxieties, but those are more to do with experiences through life. Unfortunate things that happen when dogs come flying off lead and decide to go a bit crazy. But we won't go down that rabbit hole, and that's what I'm going to try not to do, by the way. Go down rabbit holes. If you find me doing that, tell me to stop, because I do have a habit of doing that. So yeah, I've been really fortunate with him. I have put in a lot of time in terms of his training, because the thing that I experienced with him, which probably is to do with being a hand rearer, is what a lot of people that own hand rears say, which is they struggle with self-control. So they struggle with impulse control, and that's not uncommon. Anecdotally, a lot of people that own hand rears will tell you that. It is possible that the reason for that is that they don't have their mother, so they don't have their dam, and when pups are climbing all over people and whatever, we can try to communicate to them that, it's not okay to use us as a jungle gym all the time. It's not okay to do this, but we can't communicate the same way that a dog can, and we can't get our timing quite right when it comes to a little pup like a dam could. So for that reason, it is suspected that hand rears can struggle with impulse control, and that's an issue that I had with him when he was younger. We worked on it a lot, but we struggle with arousal levels around people, and that's fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this later. I'm going to talk about training that we did, and things that you can do if you ever meet hand rears. But the question I'd like to pose to any trainers that are listening is, how would you know, and you don't have to answer this, how would you know if you had a hand rearer in your class or in a one-to-one? So if you're doing even behaviourists, actually, if you've got a consult form and someone puts on it, I got my dog from a rescue centre at 9 weeks, would you ask the question, were they hand reared? Were they not? Did they come into the rescue centre as a pup? Some guardians will be quite forthcoming with that information and just let you know, but some might not think it's relevant. And it is relevant, because a hand rear is not going to be the same as a dog from a breeder that was very responsible and basically ticked all of the right boxes. We can do a fab job hand rearing, but they're just not going to be the same as a dog that's from a breeder that has done everything they could possibly do, had the parents health tested, knows that the mother's got good maternal behaviour, which obviously will impact the pup. So it's something for you to consider, and hopefully you'll learn a bit in a mo about why you should be considering that. So I do have a list of things I want to talk about, by the way, because I've never done a talk before. So I'd love some feedback at the end, and I will try not to talk too quickly, which is a personal habit I am working on. So people tend to forget that hand rears are different to dogs from breeders. And when I say people, it could be guardians, it could be people meeting your pup, and I'm going to come on and talk a lot about how we can set you up for success with management and set your dog up for success in terms of keeping them in an emotional place that they can cope with. Now, in terms of my boy, what I was really what's really fortunate in terms of his rearing is that he was hand reared in a home with what the rescue centre staff called nanny dogs. So I spoke to one of them last night, and she described her spaniel as a nanny dog. So he was reared in a home with a lovely spaniel boy. I think it was called Roger, and he actually has a fascination now with spaniels, and that is more than likely why. But yeah, if you have a dog that you're rearing, or you work with a hand-reared dog, find out if there are adult dogs in the home that will puppy tolerant, because that will again make a difference to their social experiences at that very young age. So I'm going to stop talking so much about my dog, and I'm going to talk about dogs in general. So no puppy is a blank slate. No matter what anyone tells you, no pup is a blank slate. And there's several reasons for that, and several little factors. And when we're thinking about hand rears, I'm going to call these factors variables, because the experience of one hand-reared dog and all these factors are going to be different to the factors and variables of another hand-reared dog. So variable number 1, genetics. So no puppy is a blank slate, and that is because from the moment that they are conceived, they are genetically different from any other dog. Obviously, you've got mum's DNA, dad's DNA, and then you have an individual dog. And that individual dog is going to be different to all of its litter mates. So one dog in a litter might be like this, and one dog in a litter might be like that. You cannot expect litter mates to be the same. So consider variables in genetics. And when I talk about that, I don't just mean how they look. I mean temperament, I mean traits, I mean health, so many different things that feed into what makes our dogs them through genetics. So one thing to consider there. And obviously with my boy, we don't know. We don't know. I know his breed, and that's as far as it goes in terms of genetics. Mother's stress levels and health in pregnancy. This is super important. So if we have a mum that is stressed in pregnancy and she is experiencing high levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, those puppies are going to be exposed to that stress hormone throughout the pregnancy, and that there are associations with puppies being exposed to high levels of cortisol during pregnancy, having problems with anxious behaviours and stress-related behaviours later on. They're going to be more prone to this. I'm just reading a couple of the comments, so I'm going to try and dip in and out of what I'm saying and the comments. So I have limited experiences with hand-reared dogs, but some experience with a few hand-reared foals. What sort of foals, Debbie? Tell me about them. I'd love to know. I've, to be honest, in the time that I've been working with dogs, I've only ever met a handful of hand rears, one of them being my own. They're not that common, which is why I wanted to talk to them about them today. How would you compare hand reared to non-ideal breedings where they have a mum, but there was a ton of stress during pregnancy? I think that's what I'm talking about. Oh yeah, you're there. Never mind, you're ahead of me. Okay, this is where I need to read the comments when I'm talking, right? So going back to stress in utero. So yeah, if a dog is exposed to high levels of cortisol during pregnancy, they're going to be prone to anxious behaviours, very similarly to humans. So you've probably heard people say, if a mum is stressed all the time during pregnancy, the human baby is more likely to be anxious later on in life. Don't quote me on those literal words anywhere, but the amount of people that said it to me when I was pregnant, and I've heard everyone saying it, we know that the same can be said for dogs. So if a mum is being kept in horrendous conditions, and she is stressed, if she is mistreated, if she is malnourished, so her body's not getting what it needs to be getting, so puppy farm bitches, think about the conditions that those dogs are kept in, and think about the stress levels that those pups are being exposed to throughout the pregnancy. It's not a surprise that, for so many other reasons as well, obviously, but those sorts of pups are more likely to be anxious and stressed from the moment that they are born, which is really sad, but something to consider. Another thing that I find really interesting is physical stress, the mother's physical stress when they're pregnant as well. So malnutrition is an obvious one, ill health is an obvious one, but even things like if we have a pregnant bitch that goes running into a freezing cold lake, I'm not quite sure why anyone would let a pregnant bitch do that, but if they do and the body suddenly is exposed to these freezing cold temperatures, how could that physical stress impact the fetuses as well, and how could that affect them later if they're being exposed to these things a lot? Food for thought there. What I'm going to try not to do is dive down a sciencey rabbit hole, but if any of you are interested in any of this, I can direct you off to some fairly short-term studies. That's the thing about hand rears, is as far as I'm aware, if anyone knows of anything different, let me know, but I don't believe there's any long-term studies on the effects of hand rearing in adult dogs, because it's so hard to quantify what feeds into what. So yeah, a couple of things for you to think of there. Another variable, were they reared with their litter? So this is a really important one. A dog that is hand reared alone is more likely, is going to be socially deprived. If there's adult dogs in the house, that's great. But if it's literally just an orphan puppy alone that is not exposed to any other dogs during the hand rearing, they're going to be scared of other dogs. They're going to be nervous. They're going to be afraid because they've never experienced them before. So if they're being reared with their litter, that is a huge, huge bonus because there's so many benefits to that. In terms of really simple things such as thermoregulation, we know that pups huddle with the dam and with their litter to keep warm. Pups cannot thermoregulate effectively. Which is why breeders, responsible breeders, won't take them away from their litter and dam and handle them for extended periods of time. They will pop them back fairly quickly when they're very young in that neonatal phase because they can't thermoregulate. So they have the ability to do that. They can learn bite inhibition. So as our puppies play with each other, they learn bite inhibition because if one bites the other one during play and one yelps, they can learn, oh, that hurt. Now, what I'm not saying to do if you reared an orphan dog is to try and yelp when they're playing, because firstly, we're not dogs. Let's put this whole yelping when our puppies bite us to bed. We're not dogs. Let's not try and do that. But puppies can do it. And they learn social skills. So they learn how to play, they learn how to rough and tumble a little bit, they learn how to be puppies. And if they are able to spend time around adult dogs, they can start learning a little bit of social etiquette as well. And the adult dogs can feed into things that the dam would have otherwise done. So I'm going to hop back to the comments to see if there's any questions, because I don't want to ramble on ahead. Mare died, couldn't find a foster foal, became very dependent on humans, and interestingly was ostracised by the other yearlings in the field. That is interesting. I don't have a lot of experiences with horses, so yeah, really, really interesting. Twiggy's mum was caught on the streets in Spain, put into the disposal pound for 9 days, moved into a rescue centre and gave birth the day after. Gosh, Twiggy definitely had significant anxiety issues as a pup, compounded by several changes at home before she came to me. Oh, bless her. How long have you had Twiggy, Julie? I'm not sure if I've seen your previous stuff during the conference, but tell me a little bit about Twiggy and yeah, anything you know about her mum, anything to do with hand rears, I find so fascinating, in honesty. So, something else that I find very interesting, there is a study about rats and emotional regulation through licking. Now, I don't think they've replicated this study in dogs, but obviously we can transfer the knowledge that we have from one study to another. So in this study, the mother rat would lick the rat pups for a couple of reasons: to stimulate the digestive system and get all that moving, but also to promote emotional regulation. And it is suggested that if a pup misses out on that tactile stimulation, that could feed into their ability to emotionally regulate themselves later. The fantastic thing, if we are hand rearing pups, is that there are ways that humans can mimic that. And whether or not the staff at the rescue centre with my boy did that, I don't know, but he is pretty resilient. So whatever they did it right. But what happens to our dogs if they miss out on this tactile stimulation? Can they emotionally regulate in the same way as another? Is a really interesting question to consider. And in terms of maternal behaviour, it can possibly impact an adult dog's brain plasticity. Although, like I've said, there are no long-term studies on this. What I have observed myself, though, in terms of not maternal behaviour, but something that hand-reared pups will probably miss out on, is there's a study by Battaglia, if anyone's interested, that suggests that puppies that aren't able to suckle on a teat are more likely to develop an oral fixation, and maybe more likely to suckle on inappropriate items as adults. So when we talk about inappropriate items, we're talking usually soft materials like bedding. So my dog does this. He suckles on, he has this really, really gross bed. He's had 2 of these gross beds in his lifetime that I picked up when he was like the tiniest pup. I got 2, one for my house, one for my mum's house, and the one in my house died of death. a couple of years in. So we're on the second one, and he loves this bed. Whenever he's getting a little bit stressed up, he goes to this bed and he self-soothes by sucking on it. And he usually ends up going to sleep. So I need to find more of these beds because I can't find them anywhere. But in terms of preventing this, if we are rearing dogs, you can get synthetic teats, kind of like dummies for dogs. Those can be used. Now, obviously, the most ideal solution is a surrogate dam would be sought, but that solution isn't always there. If it was, then we wouldn't be necessarily having this conversation at all. So those are a few little things that I have learned, because like I say, I've never hand reared a litter, I've never done that. But those are a few interesting things that I've learned about rearing, and how it can affect things later down the line. Julie says, Twiggy wasn't hand reared, did have litter mates, but removed from mum early to reduce fear, learning via mum. Oh, bless her. I didn't realise that from your previous comment. I'm sort of bouncing between comments and my little list of things that I want to say. So apologies if I've misunderstood anything that anyone's saying, by the way. So talked a little bit about what hand rearing looks like, and what I call variables in terms of rearing. So what are some common behaviour issues that you can see with hand rears? So I've talked a little bit about impulse control, and this is the one that people will talk about probably the most when it comes to hand rears, is impulse control. And I've obviously already covered why that can happen. If anyone missed that, shout in the comments and I'll recap. Bite inhibition may lack, so if they didn't have the opportunity to play with litter mates, they may not have adequate bite inhibition. It's really important that our pups do learn this, because how can they communicate effectively with other dogs later on in adult life if they don't know basic bite inhibition? They have to learn an inhibited bite. It's really important, and if they don't, obviously that can pose communication issues later on if they try and play with dogs and they just don't have any bite inhibition. They can find themselves in some sticky situations. Other common behavioural issues attributed to dogs being hand reared, and not in all cases, by the way, I do stress this, not in all cases. Like I say, my boy's pretty resilient. Some hand rears are terrified. Anxiety and stress related behaviours, and I've covered the reasons why that can occur. And aggression and nervousness if reared alone without adequate socialisation. So if they're an orphan pup on their own, if they're rejected from the litter or anything like that. The same issues can also present if a dog is removed from the litter early. So if we have an irresponsible breeder that sells pups at 5 weeks or 6 weeks, they are going to be socially deprived of that interaction with their litter mates if they then go home and go off to a single dog household, and then they can't have their vaccinations for X amount of time, and then they're missing out on a really, really key part of learning. So it's really important that they stay with their litter for the amount of time that they're meant to be with their litter. And if you see breeders selling them at 5-6 weeks, then report. How do we work on some of these issues? So if you are a trainer and you're suddenly thinking, oh my days, I've had hand rears in my class before and I've literally never considered this little tick list of things that could end up feeding into behavioural issues. How do we work with these dogs? So the key thing in my experience, the biggest thing is management, and that's the same with any training protocols, is management. Don't put your dogs in situations that they can't cope with. So for example, when I'm talking about my boy, he really struggled with his impulse control around visitors when he was young. And we would have some visitors that fueled this fire, and we had some that listened to everything we said. And the visitors that fueled the fire didn't really get to have free interactions with him, but the visitors that were quite keen to follow our little training program that we were trying to implement within the home got to have more in-depth interactions with him. But manage those interactions, whether it means you put the dog on a lead even in your house, so that you can keep them under threshold, and you can make sure that interaction is actually beneficial to your dog's training and is not going to undo a load of work. Don't be scared to manage in whatever situations you're in. Management is absolutely key. Obviously, I don't have to. Most of the people that are tuning into this or are going to watch it on catch up are probably trainers. I don't have to tell you to reward good behaviour and not to reward behaviour that you don't want to see. You know that. Really don't know your dog's threshold though, and don't put them in situations where they're going to struggle. So that's the biggest thing. And think about what peaks our dog's arousal levels. So I know that with my dog, for example, a higher pitched voice, as with many dogs, will increase his arousal levels. So if I'm thinking about how he would get all excited and then struggle with his self-control around visitors, if I had someone that came in and started talking like this because it's a cute puppy and it's really, really sweet and wanted to fuss him, that would be too much. That already would be, if we think of him as a bucket, that bucket is overflowing with water in terms of arousal level. That would be far too much. So think about what arouses your dog. If talking like that arouses your dog and gets them so overexcited that they cannot possibly cope, they're over threshold already, then you don't do it. You obviously put your dogs in situations where they're not going to struggle and set them up for success. At the moment, I'm talking very much on an operant basis. If we have dogs with emotional struggles where they are obviously nervous or fearful of anything, I'm not suggesting you let visitors come marching into your house and fuss your dog. In the UK right now, we're in lockdown, so don't do it full stop. But yeah, I'm talking very much operant right now. And I am going to come on and talk a little bit differently in a minute. So yeah, understand your dog. Understand how they feel in these different situations. I see a lot of things online that say reinforcement is something that drives behaviour, and that is true. Reinforcement does certainly drive behaviour, but reinforcement is not the be-all and end-all of behaviour. We have to think a little bit deeper than that, and we have to understand these dogs, and that's part of the reason I'm talking about this today. And when I did my practice run of this, it lasted 45 minutes, and I'm on half an hour, so I'm clearly talking much faster. So I'll try and break down that all a little bit more in a sec. So what is the current recommended age to remove puppies from the litter? Is it more 9 to 10 weeks now? So as far as I'm aware, puppies shouldn't be sold before 8 weeks. They have to be with mum and litter up to 8 weeks. My preference would be 9 to 10. I'm not a breeder. I don't work in rescue. I work professionally as a trainer and behaviour practitioner. That would be what I would like. My view. But yeah, by the book, it's 8 weeks as far as I'm aware. Yeah. So in terms of behaviour, there's so much more to it than reinforcement. Now, if I go back to the example I just gave, if my dog was obviously super excited when people were coming into the house and they were bending over and fussing him and he was getting lots and lots of attention for that, they would be reinforcing that. But it's also really important for me as a guardian to acknowledge, why is he getting all excited? Is it true excitement, which in his case it was, or for the ham rears that may actually be anxious, are they displaying anxious behaviour? Because a lot of the time they can overlap. So ensure that you understand your dog, basically, is what I'm saying. So for the dogs that are hand reared, think back to all those variables of the rearing and how it can impact how they are feeling at the time in terms of stuff that can drive behaviour: health, diet, emotion, history, so much stuff. The rabbit hole thing is happening again. But please don't think it is just reinforcement, although it is certainly an element of it. If you're looking for a trainer, so if you have a hand-reared dog or you are going to be getting one, what I would really recommend is finding a trainer who actually has knowledge of hand rears. So it's really important that a trainer doesn't just assume that a hand rear is going to be the same as any other pup, because they are literally not going to be. They're not going to be. So find one that has knowledge of hand rears. Now, I will be quite open and honest in terms of how I ended up in this profession. When I got my boy, I wanted to do everything right. I wanted to do literally everything I possibly could right. And I started off by not doing that because I researched dog trainers in the area. I wanted to get him involved in puppy classes. I wanted to try and do everything I could for him. And I booked onto these classes that looked great on paper. And when I turned up, there was lots of there was no treats, there was no rewards. Why would we reward our dogs? They should just do things because we tell them to. And obviously I mentally checked out instantly because I didn't. Nothing sat right with me that I was hearing. But not only did the person conducting those not necessarily have knowledge of hand rears, which was really relevant to his situation, but there was not actually a huge amount of knowledge of puppies, which is crazy. Really, really crazy. So if you're looking for trainers, make sure that whoever you're working with has experience with puppies, because they need to have a good understanding of puppy behaviour, which is different to adult dog behaviour, but you need to make sure that they have knowledge of your dog's individual history, circumstances and situation if they are a hand rear. Because how can we possibly have a room of 5 dogs, if you're working with 5, 4 of those have come from breeders who have done all the right things, ticked all the right boxes, and then one of them is a hand rear whose mother died during birth, and was reared by rescue centre staff or something. How can you treat them all the same? You can't. You have to make tiny little tweaks so that each dog is getting what they need to get. And that brings me on to a really important point is I've talked quicker than I wanted to talk because I'm not going to lie to you. I was so nervous coming on to do this live. I've never spoken live online. I've never spoken live to professionals. I speak live to clients so much. But those are clients. It's different from other professionals, right? So I'm really sad that I've rattled through all this really, really quickly. But the one thing I would love everyone to take away, and then what I'm going to do is kind of go through the comments and just ask if anyone's got anything that they'd like to chat about, is every dog is an individual. So please treat every dog as an individual. We cannot think puppies are blank slates, because from the moment that they're conceived, they're not. We can't be thinking that puppies are blank slates because they were all, they all went to a home at 8 or 9 weeks. Every single dog is an individual, from what they experience during pregnancy to what they experience during those first few weeks to what happens when they go home to what they were fed during weaning. All of those little experiences feed into our dog, and we have to work with the dogs that we have in front of us. My husband, several years ago, had a collie, and he cannot, and he probably realised this when we got our dog, who obviously is different to the dog that he's had before. He couldn't possibly try and train and work with the dog that we have now in our home with us in the same way that he trained this collie. They're 2 very different dogs. What is, I don't want to say sad, but what is changing and needs to continue to change is this idea that people say, well, I'm watching this dog over there do that, and that's what I want my dog to do. Because your dog might not be able to do that. Your dog will have its own emotions, will have its own thoughts. Your dog is a sentient being. And we need to work with the dog that we have in front of us, not the dog that we think we should have, not the dog that we had 10 years ago, not the dog that our neighbour has. We have to work with the dog that we've actually got in front of us. So Debbie said that she's going to add another section onto her questionnaire, and yeah, I love that. Thanks, Debbie, because like I say, some people will put on their on the questionnaires that you fill out, I've got a rescue, but will people think to say the history of their rescue? Maybe not. So yeah, thank you for saying that I've done well, because when I did my test run of this, I have a nearly 2-year-old, and she was sat in front of me eating her dinner, and she's who I rehearsed this to, and she can't give me any feedback, which is actually probably a really, really good thing. So does anyone have any questions at this point? What I'd love to be able to do is share some more information about my boy with you, if anyone is interested in any of our experiences. But yeah, I'm open to questions at this point because I'm running like 25 minutes ahead. I'm again just skimming through the comments because everything's appearing kind of in a funny order. So Kareen says, I found my puppies learnt more from mum than siblings. Puppies yelping never stopped the offender biting. If anything, the offender just bit more, although I realised not the same for every breed. I used to give mum one-on-one time with each individual pup, as dealing with a full litter of fangs can be overwhelming. Yeah, so it's really good actually that you considered the feelings of mum there, because like you say, mums can get overwhelmed. And you know, same as human mums really. Each dam can be very different in terms of their maternal behaviour and how they cope with things. In terms of puppies yelping and the offenders carrying on, it's probably phrased better than I would have phrased it myself. So thank you for that. Yeah, so when we have two pups playing together, and obviously one of them is puppy biting and the other one is yelping, what those yelps can do is fuel arousal levels. So the one that is biting and playing, those arousal levels will go up because these noises can peak arousal, and then that's when obviously things can tip over into things can escalate in terms of behaviour that isn't desirable. So in terms of bullyish behaviour from one dog, perhaps a little squabble might break out or something like that. Whereas we know that puppy communication and adult communication are two really, really different things. So puppies can learn a lot more from the adults in their lives that they can learn lots from litter mates, but they learn an awful lot from the adults in their lives. And that's why it was so important that my boy, when he was being reared with his litter, had those nanny dogs in the home with him, because they would have made such a humongous difference to his social skills, and is probably one of the reasons that he's a very well-rounded adult dog with really good social skills. In terms of socialization, I did want to talk about that and I completely whizzed past it. It's really important with ham rears, by the way, that we do consider careful socialization and real socialization. So what so many people think socialization is throwing our dogs into these situations where everything is a meet and greet, everything is an opportunity to say hello to somebody, everything is full on play. And what you end up with if you do an awful lot of that is a frustrated dog who possibly displays lead frustration later on when they can't have all their little meet and greets where they've always had. If we let our dogs say hello to every single dog they see, every person they pass, that is what we are setting them up to expect. And when we can't meet those expectations, that's when our dogs get really frustrated. So in terms of what I class as real socialization, teach your dogs to be calm around other dogs and people. Teach them to check in with you and focus on you, as opposed to saying hello and trying to pull over to every dog that they teach. And I'm not going to start talking about how we teach that now, because I know full well that there are other speakers that have covered it probably in a slightly more composed way than I would cover it right now. So be very careful with the socialization and set up some lovely little play dates with really socially appropriate dogs. So when I say socially appropriate dogs, I mean adults that are puppy tolerant, because not all adult dogs are. So it's really important they're puppy tolerant and really accepting of puppies, that can communicate well with other dogs. So can read other dogs' body language, can read those calming signals, can read displacement behaviour and any social cues, because that is how our puppies will learn. If we let puppies just run off and play with adolescent dogs and run off and play with other pups, there's a sort of a line that I say to my clients when I'm talking to them about doggy etiquette and communication, which is, there's only so many times that you can run up to a stranger and hug them before that stranger's going to punch you in the face. That normally gets laughs when I'm teaching a group, which is kind of a relief, right? Because that could go badly. But yeah, so obviously the concept behind that is, if we teach our dogs to always just go flying up to any dogs that they see, and they always do that, they're going to do it to the wrong dog one day, and there could be an escalation there that could affect them. So socialise your dogs carefully and set them up for success in terms of palling them up with dogs that will teach them good social skills, because they will really, really benefit from that later. And if you can get involved with that by teaching them how to engage and disengage when asked, then that's really important, because if our dogs are rough and tumbling with dogs and playing, and we can see that arousal levels are really creeping up, we need them to disengage when we ask, because otherwise it could get to a point where arousal levels get too high, and that's when obviously things can tip over and turn a little bit, not because any dogs are aggressive, but maybe one dog might mount the other one, and the situation might escalate there. So really important that we teach them to do that. And in terms of the dogs that may have been socially deprived in terms of hand rearing, so maybe they have been reared on their own, or they were reared with a litter, but for one reason or other were separated from their litter early. The dogs that were socially deprived and may display nervous behaviours, we need to be so careful in terms of desensitising them and counter conditioning them to other dogs. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, because that will be at least a 2-hour discussion from me, because that's sort of my passion project really, behaviour wise, is how is doggy emotions about other dogs and the way that dogs interact. So I'm not going to go down there, but if you have a dog that you know has been socially deprived, don't throw that dog in the thick of it, don't flood it. Be very, very careful in terms of how you're counter conditioning. Do I recognise hand rears without being told? No. Not really, in honesty. I'd love to. that would be a superpower. No, because it's kind of easier actually with. This is where it's tricky. So I'm going to try not to talk myself in circles. So a hand rear could be very puppyish as an adult dog. Is that because they're hand reared? Or is it because they have been reinforced and rewarded for behaviours that we don't want to see? Is it genetics, that's just how they're built? Were they neutered too young? And has that affected the way that they've been able to develop? I'd love to be able to identify hand rears straight off the bat. I really would, but again, we might not be seeing just excited behaviours. It might be nervousness, and there's, that could be attributed to, again, genetics, stress before birth. It could be experiences through the dog's life. That's where it's really, really tricky with hand rears, because like I mentioned earlier, there's no long-term quantitative studies on the behaviour of hand reared dogs. And if anyone can find one, please send it to me. But as far as I love learning about hand rears, and I've never been able to find anything particularly long term, because once the dogs go home to their new homes and they start being socialised with all these other dogs and other people, and their world is open in terms of the things that they could experience, all of a sudden all of that stuff has the possibility to impact them. So no, the answer in a very long-winded way is no, I don't recognise hand rears without being told. But it's something that I would love to be able to do. But yeah, if you know you're working with rescue dogs in a trainer capacity, ask the question, what's their history? Particularly if you have a dog coming into your class or a one-to-one, and they're a rescue that have come from a rescue centre or somewhere like that, that's 9-10 weeks old, ask the question, or why were they surrendered to rescue so young? Or were they not surrendered to rescue? Were they hand reared? Because some guardians just won't think to be forthcoming with that information, but it could impact the way that you plan to train that dog. So I'm finishing 15 minutes early. I have waffled, and I've probably not covered everything that I covered when I did my practice talk to my 2-year-old that can't give me any feedback. But I have really enjoyed doing this. Thank you, Ruby, for the opportunity. By the way, I did want to give a plug to my local rescue centre who reared my boy. They saved his life. They saved the life of his litter. They did a absolutely phenomenal job of rearing him, and I can't thank them enough for the work they did with him and the work they continue to do with every dog that comes into their care. They're an independent charity based in South Devon, They're called Animals in Distress, and like many rescue centres, they have not been able to fundraise for the last 12 months as much as they would have done in normal circumstances. They haven't been able to do a lot of their events, they haven't been able to go out and do different things, and they still have dogs to look after and dogs to rehome. So if you're interested in looking at any of their work, you can find them at animalsindistress.uk.com. Have a nosy at their website. They've got a new website, which is very exciting. And if you would like to consider making a donation to them, it would be hugely, all the staff would be hugely grateful. I would be grateful as a supporter of the rescue centre, because I have everyone at the rescue centre to thank for me having my best friend. And if they didn't do such a great job with him, I wouldn't be where I am. He's helped me through an awful lot, and taught me more about dogs than any book ever could. So yeah, if you could just spare £2, that'd be cool. But no pressure, absolutely no pressure. Thank you all for listening. I'm going to end this live video and shush. Apologies that I'm ending early, but like I say, it gives everyone the opportunity to snuggle further into bed, if that's where you still are, Debbie, or go and have a wee and get some chocolate or whatever you want to do. So enjoy the rest of your conference, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I enjoy watching the rest of the speakers talk. Take care. Bye.